We've spent a lot of time talking in the last couple of days about what makes a startup successful. And one of the factors that's often overlooked is location. Where you are determines what resources are available. And some cities and regions do a better job of making themselves attractive to startups. So, here with us to discuss what startups need to do business and what sort of ecosystems cities can create to support them, I am pleased to welcome our next panel, moderated by Joachim Dorfs, the editor-in-chief of the Stuttgarter Zeitung. Joachim, the stage is yours. Welcome. Bring up your panelists. Good to see you this morning.
Thank you.
Welcome. Welcome to the main stage.
Well, please come to the stage. Right. Please. Well, thank you very much for the kind introduction. Startup, location development ecosystems. One key to success for startups is the choice of their location. What can cities, what can regions do to become more attractive to founders? What needs to be done to create a supporting ecosystem? This is in brief the topic we would like to discuss in the next 40 minutes with 3 distinguished panelists who all were or are successful entrepreneurs and who know what kind of ecosystem a startup needs to grow up. The 4th panelist, Hans Shakur from Markitex in Israel, unfortunately got ill and isn't able to attend, which is kind of a shame because everybody who's been in Israel rather admires the capacity of bringing new startups, and it would have been very interesting to get to know some insights from there. But we have a very competent panel anyway, more airtime for everybody, so let's get started. I would like to start with Clark Parsons, former journalist from the US, now managing director of the Internet Economy Foundation. Before, he founded Vortel, a voice-over IP company, sold it in 2008. He led the Berlin School of Creative Leadership. He's well connected in the startup and the funding scene, particularly in Berlin. Members of the Internet Economy Foundation Council include personalities like Ralf Dommermuth, René Obermann, Oliver Samwer, kind of who's who of Germany's internet business. Just to get started, Clark, what does the Internet Economy Foundation do?
First of all, thanks for having me. We are trying to help Europe and Germany catch up in one sentence. I think if you look at the top 20 valuation internet companies around the world, not a single one is from Europe. They're all from the US or China, one Japanese. And if you look at the size of those companies and the power that they're starting to exert, there's a feeling around Europe that something needs to be done to help ecosystems like we're going to discuss today happen all across Europe. And so we're trying to help the politicians, help the public, and help the companies find the best way forward to build strong digital ecosystems around Europe.
So obviously the location does matter when you found a company, but why is that so? I mean, choice for a city, for a country, in times of internet, in times of Skype and all this stuff, can't you just build your company anywhere?
I'd say a couple answers. I also worked in Standortpolitik when I first got to Berlin, actually helping bring companies in. And so I was very close, like Jackson, to watching Berlin develop itself into a more attractive place for startups. You know, Richard Florida, the great author, always says 3 T's, tech, talent, and tolerance for him are how you create a creative ecosystem. I always told people years ago in Berlin, it's the cheap rent. Yeah? I mean, I think you have to do things. First of all, people starting internet companies need speed and scale, and so there's a lot of things that happen in tech and enterprises where access to co-founders, access to talent, access to capital, and ultimately to customers can be really important. But watching Berlin develop in the past few years, you also see that this cluster effect has taken effect. The fact that Universal Music is there, MTV, Bild Zeitung, there's such a coming together of different elements of a creative cluster. It makes it very attractive for young people to move there, and that's one of the key motors of any of these ecosystems, is a constant supply of fresh young talent, whether they're students or former students moving for their first job.
And the personal interaction matters very much, obviously.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think, ultimately founders are human beings, and the people that are funding them are human beings. They have to have ways to come together, either in an organized way or in spontaneous ways. I mean, it's funny how many founding stories and first, traction moments happen through happenstance, just literally bumping into each other. So I think there will always be a place for clusters. Hollywood funds most of the films. They get made all around the world, but the blockbusters are still made there because the money's there, and it's just a place where you can very quickly have access to everyone in the ecosystem, and I think that still plays a role.
So let's come to Jackson Bond, serial entrepreneur, co-founder and head of product of Relayer, which won the Coda N contest last year. Before, he had, among others, senior positions in Parship and Xing. He knows the startup scenes in Germany, but also in the US very well. So just to begin, Relayer is an IoT company. In brief, what do you do?
We basically connect old things like machines in factories or old buildings or old elevators. We connect these things to the internet so that you can see the data and watch the health and the status of these things and connect them to other things. So we're a data middleware, if you will, a data middleware for the world around us.
How many people do you have?
We have now about 80 people. We're about 2.5 years old. We're based in Berlin. We have, I'd say, 30 countries represented in our team. Most of our talent, funny enough, doesn't come from Germany. Most of our talent comes from all over the world, everywhere else, coming to Berlin. I think our common language is first broken English, and second is Spanish,
okay,
and then Portuguese, and then Russian, and then somewhere down the ladder it's English, and I think we have 2 Germans.
Okay, so broken English is my part on this panel. You are the second-born American on this panel who now lives in Berlin. So why is Berlin so appealing?
So we were talking about it before we got up on stage, and I think Berlin is appealing for a number of reasons, but I think primarily it is, as Clark was saying, it's an attractive place for young creative people. And you need young creative people, but you also need an academic foundation. So you have in Berlin, you have a lot of universities, but you also have cheap rent. It's very attractive for people to move to. And it's a place full of chaotic and almost schizophrenic historical fragmentation. And that's interesting for the rest of the world and young people who are graduating from universities. They're looking for a place to go where like-minded individuals can share their ideas. And I think that's very, very important. And I don't know where else in Germany or where else in Europe, maybe London, but it's some of these big urban centers where you attract individuals that can cross-pollinate each other. They begin to share their ideas and discuss and open and talk. And I think if you don't have that dialogue, that constant discussion, that constant sharing your ideas, if you don't have that, it's very difficult to foster and build an ecosystem. It's not about money. It's not as easy as just dumping a lot of money on a city and saying, let's do Silicon Valley in the city. It's not going to happen.
So because everybody is so enthusiastic about Berlin, just tell us the 3 biggest disadvantages of Berlin as an ecosystem.
The 3 disadvantages. The 3 disadvantages. That's tough. I love Berlin. I've been there now 25 years, so I really love that city. Disadvantages.
Okay.
Yeah, I think Clark,
just one.
Even one is difficult. I think the easy answer might be, there's no industry in Berlin.
Okay.
But that doesn't matter.
That's not true.
that doesn't. Well, there's a little bit of industry, but it doesn't matter. You don't need the industry on the location. There's no banks or finance in Berlin. It doesn't matter. That's not what this. Now in this economy, in this technological state that we're in, it doesn't matter where you are. And that's why Berlin is so fascinating, because it's really so fragmented. But Clark, I think you had an idea.
Well, actually, I mean, yeah, you said the main one. I think for a lot of startups, the most important thing you have to do as a startup to get even a good Series A usually is to show traction, the great word, to show that your product is somehow fitting the market and there are actually people that maybe want to pay or at least to use your product or idea. And often to get traction, if you're not in B2C, which Berlin does focus on a lot, you need clients or customers. And the joke around Berlin is that all of the clients are in the south of Germany or the west of Germany. So,
But it doesn't matter.
It matters.
Yeah, okay. Doesn't matter?
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that they're not there. Look, we were founded in Frankfurt. We were accelerated in Amsterdam. We decided to come back to Berlin because that's where we live and have our families. But our customers are from all over the world, and our investors are from all over the world. It doesn't matter. I mean,
So I would like to ask Christian Roth if he agrees. Maybe just as a brief introduction. Christian Roth, entrepreneur and VC investor from Karlsruhe. Almost half a year ago, Christian joined Lea Partners to head its venture capital business and act as an entrepreneurial partner for Lea's software digital investments with a strong regional focus on Baden-Württemberg. So you're the lobbyist for Baden-Württemberg and the Karlsruhe tech cluster here on this panel. 15 years ago, you founded Beyontra, a company focusing on supporting airports and optimizing their efficiency, and sold it later to Lockheed Martin. So today you're an active VC. Maybe just to get started, what's the most interesting company you're invested in?
Well, we just recently closed the A series for Pace, a connected car, smart car company here, also based in Karlsruhe. And I mean, taking up some of Jackson's points, of course, I can't fully agree with what you just said about Berlin. I think there's the potential for lots of different ecosystems to be positioned within, let's say, Europe or within even a country like Germany. Karlsruhe or the southwest region here is definitely one of them. And I think it depends, or the strength of an ecosystem depends on various factors, as also Clark pointed out in the beginning. There's definitely talent or a pool for talent. A university like we have here in Karlsruhe with KIT is definitely a huge differentiator, was also for developing my company. Great to get young, at the beginning still relatively cheap or affordable engineers into a company. A city needs to be attractive. I think that's also where we need support, basically, by institutions, by the politic, basically, to make a city attractive, to make a framework attractive. Affordability is definitely also a point. The cultural offering is a point, and definitely there is advantages for a city like Berlin, especially targeting creative industry, targeting the B2C business. But yeah, I think that's one of the strengths here in the Southwest. We have access to the industry. We have basically the industry, or lots of industry, in our back park, where basically young companies can easily sell into. And that's definitely what we also as LEA try to focus on, supporting local companies, supporting B2B focused companies here out of Baden-Württemberg to start up and be also some sort of a regional financing partner, being close to them in the beginning of that journey.
So if you compare those two locations, what is in favor of Karlsruhe?
In favor, or let's say comparing big Berlin to relatively small Karlsruhe is of course difficult because there's tons of pros of let's say an attractive city as Berlin is, but we definitely have, as I said, our differentiators here. KIT is one of them, or the university is one of them. You have people from all over the world studying in Karlsruhe, being heavily on the tech side. Yeah, tons of innovation basically on the research side. Great software engineers basically. So the pool for innovation and the pool for talent is definitely there. It might be a challenge keeping the people here in the region. So that's definitely, I think, a differentiator to Berlin. That Berlin is, let's say, for a young professional, definitely the more sexy place to live than basically a city here in the southwest like Karlsruhe or Stuttgart is. Clusters and support for companies is definitely also a key one. There is tons of institutions, obviously, in Berlin. We have been catching up in the last years in the southwest as well. Karlsruhe, for example, with Cyber Forum is one example. A high-tech network acting as an accelerator, especially for young companies, supporting them in the first steps. And that's also my learning, basically, from the entrepreneurial background, that having local partners, being close to them, can act as a benefit. I mean, of course, you can hop on a train, you can hop on a plane to meet your VC or to meet your mentor, basically. But having people close, especially in the early stages, in my experience, definitely is a benefit.
So you know the ecosystem in Baden-Württemberg very well. Just for 2 minutes have a regional focus. If you look at Baden-Württemberg, where are the best the best chances to found a company within Baden-Württemberg? Is it Karlsruhe? Is it Mannheim? Is it Stuttgart? Doesn't matter.
I think there's pros and cons, obviously, to all of the different locations. I mean, for a reason they call the region here the European Silicon Valley, basically, especially when it comes to the technical innovation. So you could say the Rhine Valley, and then obviously stretching over to the Stuttgart region as well, with, I mean, global leaders like SAP being 30 kilometers to the north of here, etc. So I mean, I wouldn't say there's a distinctive advantage of founding in Karlsruhe over Stuttgart or the other way around. I mean, depends on the routes. Both cities are definitely attractive. There's also a scene in the south in Freiburg, for example. Tübingen has a lot of let's say innovation around health. So typically, what we see is that university is driving, or the focus of the university, with Karlsruhe industry tech focus, Stuttgart a bit more on the media and digital side, Tübingen a bit more on the health side, is driving the innovation and is then the trigger basically for startups positioning themselves in the beginning around university and then start their journey. I mean, many of them move to Berlin as well, especially if they have a commerce focus and not a business focus. So that's the challenge.
So the question is, how do you keep them here? How do you make it attractive for these young creative people to stay here? And I think that's, again, Berlin has an automatic advantage because it's cheap and because there's already so much activity there. But if you want to build a new location, I think you really have to, as a city, the government has to invest heavily in subsidizing, seriously subsidizing young people to make it possible to stay here. I was in Dusseldorf 2 days ago with Bearing Point. Anyone from Bearing Point in the room? So I was there with Bearing Point. I know everyone here is from Accenture, I think. But I was with Bearing Point and a customer of Bearing Point's. And we went to the only co-working space. Dusseldorf has, I think, maybe someone from Dusseldorf is here and knows, but I think they have one co-working space. One in all of Dusseldorf. That's not going to help their ecosystem. They need 10 co-working spaces. They need everywhere. They need to buy up spaces and create these spaces so that there's a chance for young people to go and start cross-pollinating, right? And then, of course, having them be provided with some funds. So small, little bit of pre-seed financing give some of these guys a chance. Make it very, very easy for them to start and launch their idea. It's not enough to have just an attractive city and an attractive university, because they'll all leave to go to Berlin or London or New York or Silicon Valley. You have to make it really attractive, and that's going to cost the city money in the first instance. You've got to invest. But it'll pay out tenfold in 10 years.
Do you see that mayors from German cities think the way you do?
I don't know any mayors from other cities.
Okay.
But
do you see any other locations besides Berlin who are attractive to startups or to entrepreneurs in Germany?
No, I have not heard. But that's my ignorance.
Yeah.
I'm not very political in that sense, so I don't have.
I would say I see a lot across Germany. I mean, Hamburg comes to mind because of its media connection. Munich as well, because it was sort of where the first wave of American software companies hit when they came in. But it's an interesting, there's sort of two forces at work here. One is this idea that there are sort of places like Berlin where we should all go cluster and where we can attract talent. And the other idea that we're also very supportive of across Europe is trying to sort of build this network of strong, small nodes along the network. I mean, it's the strength we've all seen in the Mittelstand of southern Germany and Baden-Württemberg. Ironically, your former minister-president, Günther Oettinger, is the digital commissioner, and this is a huge subject that we're supporting, that he's pushing, the so-called digital single market for Europe, so that a Karlsruhe startup can go to France or go to the Netherlands or go to Sweden with one click, instead of having to hire a lawyer and a policy team and get 27 different end-user license agreements and 27 different VAT rules. So there's a lot to be done across Europe to make it possible for the Karlsruhe startup to stay here, keep their talent, but also do business across Europe, across enough of a synchronized market, so that you don't necessarily have to go to the cluster. Yeah. As Jackson said, location is less important in his mind now, which is in many ways true, but if it only works if you have a legal framework and a financing and policy framework that makes it possible for the small town startup here to compete the way someone in Boulder, Colorado can compete all across the USA.
So what you basically say is to cities that are not Berlin, be attractive or try to get more attractive, build clusters, build networks. But I mean, how do you measure that? Is this just a kind of soft factor that is difficult to build up, difficult to measure? Are there any KPIs that you could have in mind when you're a mayor of a city and say, okay, now we're on a track towards being more attractive to founders? Some KPIs that you could try to reach. What would that be?
I would say, I mean, obviously, most of the politicians now are starting to listen to the founders and the startups to hear where it hurts. What's the biggest problem? They might think, well, the problem is, we need to get faster broadband, and the startups might tell them, well, no, it's actually a problem. I can't get a visa for my programmer. So you have to listen to figure out where it hurts, and each of these ecosystems probably has something where it hurts differently or the most. I think it's just really important that dialogue happen between the industry and the politicians. And I think, one of the jokes of Berlin is that startup scene succeeded in some ways despite the government, which is now trying to do as much as it can to help. But there's a lot of things that just made Berlin attractive, and the local politicians are still in some ways trying to understand that ecosystem and feed it as best they can. You wanted to say something?
Christian.
I think you can also definitely measure it in the numbers in investment into companies, because ultimately that's what most startups definitely need, funding to get them onward, basically, and that's what we definitely see, and what we also obviously support here in the Southwest, basically, and where we see a strong commitment, basically, by the partners, by the public partners, by the private partners, in putting more money, basically, also into Baden-Württemberg, which is definitely required, which is catching up. And I mean, I think I just recently read an Ernst & Young study, basically, which said that Baden-Württemberg is the number 2, basically, behind Berlin, far behind Berlin, but still the number 2, in risk investment, basically, and that's definitely required for a regional ecosystem to grow, and that's what we need to support more.
I wanted to just make one important point. You are an example of what I think most ecosystems need, which is a successful entrepreneur who stays and reinvests your time and energy and money to build the ecosystem. I mean, Silicon Valley is Silicon Valley because you have 2 or 3 generations of founders who stayed and turned and then brought the next generation up. And that's why Berlin, has some success now, because you have some exits and some successful trade sales to bring more capital and keep the capital in that ecosystem. So I think, it's really important, someone like you saying, well, I'm not going to go to London, I'm going to stay here and make this region work. You had something.
I was just going to say that I think on the one hand, you want to have people stay, but on the other hand, you want those people, just like your children. You don't want your children to stay at home. You don't want your children to stay in the neighborhood. You want them to go out into the world, discover new things, learn new things, and then come back with all of that knowledge and that creativity and invest it in your neighborhood or your city, and that enriches the ecosystem. So if I were a mayor, my KPIs would be, how many creative foreigners can I get into my city, making it very attractive for them, low barriers for studying at the universities, low barriers for founding a company. That would be one KPI. How many can I get? The other KPI would be entrepreneurial training. Entrepreneurial training, how many courses can I create? How many trainings can I create for young people, not even young people, people like my age? I'm 47 or 48? 48.
I don't know.
48, I think. I just turned 48. So I'm 48. I forgot, right.
Congratulations.
So any age, really, these people, how many people can I put through entrepreneurial programs and then see them found a company? So my KPI would be, how many conversions from entrepreneurial training to founding? That would be a really important KPI, and the investment that it requires to get those people to found a company and help them found it. And the other KPI would be speed to market. So it's not enough just to have them found a company, it's how fast can I, as a mayor, or can I, as a government, enable companies to start their business? Because in some areas of Germany or Europe, it's very difficult. It's very time-consuming. And if you don't speak the language, it's almost impossible. And of course, you have to speak German, right? But I think we're in a global society, so we need to make it very easy. And in Berlin is a great example. In Berlin now, so we have 75, 80 employees, 30 countries. So we deal with this every day. These poor engineers who come from Brazil, or they come from China or India, we have to somehow help them get into society. They have to get these things done. And it's getting easier and easier and easier now. Berlin has identified that they need to have English speakers in the offices, in these Ämter, and they're speaking English, which is amazing. 5 years ago, that was unheard of.
Just picking up on the second point Jackson made, the entrepreneurial spirit or vision. I mean, that's also something I think which is key, basically, to support from a variety of perspectives. University is one. That's also one key thing for us, trying to bring into young companies, into young founders, because you see a difference in, let's say, the greatness of vision, let's say, between people and founders in Berlin, in Silicon Valley, and that's one of the key, I wouldn't say limitations, but people here in the Southwest, I think perhaps it's also a mentality thing, might think in the beginning a bit too small, or not bold enough, yeah, and that's, I think, a key one. University or basically teaching entrepreneurs, as you said, is yeah, definitely a support on their way. Basically, think bigger, yeah, and be a bit bolder, and then, I don't know, perhaps achieve 80% or 85% of a bigger vision is still more than, I don't know, growing 5% a year.
Yeah.
Well, this is one of the issues we're working on at the IEF. A lot of the great European success stories and German success stories, you could look at them and say they sold out too early, in which there was a trade sale, maybe 100 million, 200 million. People thought that's great here, but actually that company might have been a multi-billion-dollar global company. But what we often see is that the founders did not have other options. There was maybe not enough growth funding for them at the stage when they were looking to do a Series B or C round. It's something we're working on to help that there's more options for founders if they do want to grow into a global company. And if I can make just one more little point, a plaidoyer, if you will. How many of you here are working at large companies? Or any hands? Yeah, a few. I think one of the most important things that you can do if you're at a large company is when you get that cold call email or phone call from the salesperson or the CMO saying, I'm working at a startup or I'm working at this new tech company and we have a product, would you be interested in 30 minutes for a meeting? Please take that meeting. Please read that email. I think that's the biggest thing that the large companies in Germany could do. If all of the large German companies gave a chance to the small German companies, the game would be over. Yeah? There is such an advantage here structurally right now that you're in danger of losing because you're not listening to the small companies and the startups and the innovators. So let them in.
Okay. So just one last question before we open the panel to questions from the audience. I have to ask you one question. You're both born in the U.S. How do you judge xenophobic tendencies in Germany, and how dangerous is that to this kind of ecosystem you're part of?
It's a very, very serious problem. It's a super serious problem, and it needs to be addressed. At the other side of the spectrum, though, I would say that it will never, because of the influx of all of this talent from outside of Germany and the German willingness and embracing this. You know, Germany embraces all of this activity like no other country, and because of that, they are creating a extremely powerful foundation for their own future. And there are xenophobic tendencies, and they are very serious and very dangerous, but they will never become powerful. They will never become a deciding factor. They will always remain at the very edge. They will never disappear, but they'll never become a serious threat, I don't think. They're dangerous to watch, but never a serious threat. I'm not at all concerned.
Clark?
I think that's very serious, especially because, as Jackson said, he's trying to recruit people from all over the world. If I'm a young Indian engineer and I read that an Indian just got beaten up on the S-Bahn platform in this city, well, maybe I'll go to that city. So just literally where the young talent is going, you know, that matters. But, you know, I think all across Europe right now we're seeing these movements, and even unfortunately in America, where there's, you know, right now a political movements based on nationalism and ethnic identity and other things. It's a scary moment around the world right now. I think when you see how many different types of sort of strong nationalist leaders are threatening to come to power, or at least coming to power. So Germany's not immune from that. And I think when you look at the numbers in other countries, in some ways you can almost be proud that those tendencies are, let's say, relatively still smaller here. But I think it's something, you know, it's something very important, and, you know, it led to Brexit in some ways. And I think, you know, this is, you know, Germany is the export world champion. You know, you are one of the most successful countries in the world because you're selling your products to people all over the world. You should by default be one of the most world-embracing countries there is. And so for me, it's quite ironic that there is xenophobia going around, because all of those cultures that the xenophobes are rejecting are buying the VWs, they're buying the Siemens power plant, they're buying the Bosch vacuum cleaner. So it's a bit of an ironic for me.
Okay. So, questions from the audience. Who's going to be the first? I have enough questions left, so if there's nobody.
Is your email inbox full or empty is the main question for you right now, yes?
Are there any questions from the audience? Okay, so I just keep on.
I have a question.
Okay, you got a question.
I have a question for the audience.
Okay.
How many of you are actually from Karlsruhe? Raise your hand high, 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 high. So, and how many of you are from Baden-Württemberg? Okay, and how many are not from Baden-Württemberg? Oh, nice. Okay,
majority.
Good. That's good.
Majority,
Well, it's a nice mix.
yeah.
It's a nice mix.
Okay.
And how many are not German? Not German. Any not German? Okay, excellent, excellent, good. Just wanted to get a feeling for who's here.
Okay, okay. So, I mean, we were just talking about factors that are important for the ecosystem. Would you consider, and we also talked about, you I think it was you, Jackson, who mentioned it doesn't matter if the clients are elsewhere, so the founders are in Berlin, the clients are in Baden-Württemberg, for instance. I mean, isn't it very important for a startup to have a big company or even a client in the neighborhood? I mean, isn't it a big USP for Baden-Württemberg, for instance, to have companies? I mean, I see Peter Leibinger here in the audience. To have Trumpf, to have Daimler, to have NBW, who are very, very interested in cooperating with startups, and so isn't it a big advantage for them?
I think it's not mandatory, as Jackson put it.
Yeah.
I mean, we live in a very agile world, but it's definitely a huge advantage. I mean, being especially, and I think especially in early stages, I think it's a huge advantage to have a strong local market, or to have a strong home market, yeah, where you can hop on a car or on a train and be with your client in a couple of minutes or in half an hour, versus spending a day for a 2-hour meeting going from Berlin to Munich. So that's definitely a benefit, because the interaction in basically early projects, first projects, the viability of a product when we talk to technology is, let's say, depending on a close cooperation between the clients and the startups and the companies. So it definitely is a benefit. And as I said, I think the same is especially in early stages for regional or local focused basically funding, that you have partners basically who support you and who are not basically I don't know, 3-4 hours or even in a different time zone. Basically when you need that interaction, yeah, and when not everything, which is natural for a startup, goes after the first shot of a business plan, yeah, and needs basically some close communication and potentially also guidance.
I'd mention one thing also that maybe also answers the question about a disadvantage of Berlin too. A lot of people look at the German startup scene and the Berlin startup scene, which gets a lot of capital now. It's mainly, in a way, BWLer is what a German would say. A lot of the German startups that people look to as the great internet companies are commerce companies. They're commercial platforms. They're not necessarily technology companies. There are some, but this is an advantage that you have down here. Is, you know, the Mittelstand cluster down here in southwestern Germany is a lot of technology-based things around the car and other things. So you have a potential advantage. You could beat Berlin. You could beat London. You have technology here. The Israelis come to Berlin and they say, where's the technology? You know, the Israelis do technology-based startups. They're solving a technical problem, maybe with an algorithm, maybe with hardware, but they're solving a real problem using technology. They're not just aggregating users who want to read about pets. So this is an important thing that you could be doing here, and to connect the universities, to connect the tech companies and the institutes, and build more startups around technology.
I was just going to say to all of, to reiterate your point before, the customer relationship is not geographically dependent at all. Particularly now that you have some large companies, many large companies, and some even smaller, mid-sized companies are actually leaving their Standort, they're leaving their location to go discover innovation, to go discover. They're actually proactively now going out and trying to find new suppliers and new innovations. And that's one of the things I think Berlin becomes a magnet, but any other city could have the same, could provide the same opportunity by inviting companies to come and create that innovation hub and the ability to expose them and connect them. And again, this is the government's job. The government's job, and maybe the corporate's job, is to connect these big companies in this ecosystem with outside small companies or small companies innovating in the same location. Berlin benefits because we have all sorts of companies from all over the world who are looking to start their own innovation hub in Berlin. We were, just yesterday I was talking to a big global Danish-based company, and they're going to set up an incubator. A Danish company is going to set up an incubator not in Copenhagen, in Berlin. Why in Berlin? But they could, you know, why don't they just do it in Copenhagen and invite all of these young companies to come and be part of it? I don't understand that. So they could actually, I think it's a lost opportunity. If you're a corporation, why go to Berlin? You could do it in your headquarters, where you're based. I mean, unless you're based somewhere out in the countryside. But if you're based in an urban area, or close to an urban area, you can invite companies to come, small companies to come and participate and basically establish that dialogue for innovation. But you have to do that, and the government has to do that and support it.
Okay, so is there one last question from the audience? Because time is over, but I would take one question, at least one question from the audience. If not, okay. If not, I thank all the panelists. It was very interesting for me. I hope for you as well. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, Joachim, and thank you, Christian, Clark. Thank you very much for being here with us today. You are dismissed.